And we're live.
Welcome back to another VC podcast. This is part 5 and brought to you by Vanguard Connect and 20 Something Podcast. I'm your host for this evening, Naomi Simon. Also joining me as co-host is Mel. Hey, Mel.
Hey.
Hey. So I hope everyone's well, enjoyed the weekend, ready for a new week, refreshed. So as always, we'll be discussing a host of topics related to the young Black community. You can get involved by using hashtag VCPODCAST on Twitter, so please do get involved. So tonight's topics include Black mental health taboo in the Black community, Black women in leadership, racism in the UK, and move me back to where? And joining me on today's panel is Charles Sekawalo. Sorry, Charles. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Naomi. Hi, everyone. So I'm Charles Sekawalo. Would best describe myself as an entrepreneur, CEO and founder of Move Me Back. We're making Africa's most exciting opportunities accessible to a global community of talented individuals. I'm also managing director of COS Ventures, and we build and invest in businesses across the globe that drive positive change.
Brilliant, thank you. And Toby Akinbade from Dream Nation and writer of Mental Health. Hey, Toby.
Hi, hello everyone. So I'm Toby. Dream Nation is basically a mission to educate and inspire a generation of practical dreamers. And most recently, we did a mental health campaign called Be Well.
Brilliant, thank you. And Diana Tembe.
Hey everyone, I'm Diana Tembe. I'm the CEO and founder of Africa Fashion Week Amsterdam. And just finished my bachelor's degree in tourism and travel management.
Brilliant, thank you. And Mariam Jamal?
Hi everyone, I'm Mariam. I'm the founder and director of WCAN, which is an initiative that focuses on getting Black women into the city, both from a personal development point of view and also from a career development point of view.
Excellent. And Sienna Bangura?
Hi everyone, my name is Sienna and I am a spoken word artist, a poet, and I'm also a journalist. I run a platform called No Fly on the Wall, which centres the voices of Black British women and Black women living in the UK. And I talk a lot about kind of the intersection of race and gender.
Brilliant. And finally, Chama K.
Hi everyone, yes, my name is Chama K. I am a poet and a spoken word artist and also a mental health blogger. I've written for a number of websites including Dream Nation, No Fly on the Wall, Grey Matters UK, and I'm also a feature writer for a charity called The Calm Zone, who focus on mental health amongst men, and I also write primarily about mental health issues affecting and involving the Black community.
Really important work. So it's really nice to have you all here. Thank you for taking the time out to be involved. So this is a special podcast for me as it is my last one hosting. So really humbling to have seen all the work and the impact of these podcasts, and I'm really looking forward to what is going to be in store now that I'm passing the baton on. So, but yeah, you can keep in touch with us on iTunes. Okay, so let's get straight into it. Our first topic is mental health within the Black community. So earlier this week, a family was hit with tragedy with the passing of Sam Sampong. Sam, an actor who was co-host on Your Mama and starred in shows such as Veronica Mars, died after committing suicide on Tuesday. Sam, who is said to have jumped over a bridge, was also the face of Tommy Hilfiger and worked with Dolce & Gabbana. So despite being extremely successful, he obviously suffered with mental health issues. And so I think this goes to show that there is no correlation between how good your life is perceived to be and the reality of your happiness and of your well-being, and that mental health can affect anyone and everyone. So just to give you a few facts, the first one being that Black men in Britain are 17 times more likely than their white counterparts to be diagnosed with a psychotic illness. However, Black patients are least likely than any other race to be referred to psychotherapy by their GPs. they're more likely to be given high doses of medication and more likely to be admitted as offender patients, i.e. people who suffer with mental health and have committed a crime, and be sent to the psychiatrist by courts. So I think those statistics speak very strongly about how much of an issue mental health is to our community. So, Toby, it would be really great if you could come in here. I just wanted to know, why do you think this issue goes so unaddressed within our community?
I think it's very cultural. So within our culture, anything that isn't I come from an African background, I'm Nigerian, so anything that isn't, happy go and everything's perfect, it's not discussed very much, and it's such a taboo, especially with religion as well. Nigerians, I'm Nigerian, so Nigerians tend to be very religious, and if you're not smiling, people assume that you're saying that you think God's not good. So in that sense, culturally, it's a big issue, and it kind of transcends into other areas of our lives, which is why it's so unaddressed, because people tend to feel ashamed to talk about any issues. I don't think depression's even a word in many homes, in many African homes. I can't speak for other cultures, but I know about my culture, and it tends not to even be a word that people
I definitely agree, and I remember being in the church and one of the speakers saying that, there's no such thing as mental health. If you believe in God, God can fix everything. So Chama, how do we get over this taboo? How do we overcome this?
Well, it's easy to say we should talk about it more, but for me, it's understanding the reasons that we don't talk. Toby did a good job there in explaining some of those reasons why Black people don't talk. And when we talk about the Black community, it's different communities. I've spoken to Black people from African American, Black British, African and Caribbean backgrounds, and actually what's come from my findings is a list of the exact same themes and the exact same tropes almost in why mental health isn't spoken about, which is religion, belief that is a white disease that often comes up. That mental health can be prayed away, but also too, which I think are very, very important to understand within Black communities, is these ideas of strength. This strong stoic Black man who never has problems and is a king, and the strong Black woman trope as well. I've heard these things. I've heard people who suffer from mental health illnesses mention this to me actually, and say that because we as a community buy into these ideas, we buy into ideas that our men must be unbelievably stoic and must never express emotion, even as the head of the household. And we buy into these ideas that the Black woman must be eternally strong and eternally the backbone of the home. We don't give any room for any kind of perceived vulnerability amongst our people, and that's damaging. Because in my opinion, that takes away humanity from Black people. If you think about what humanity is, it's the ability to feel whatever you need to feel in a given situation. You cry when you're sad, you're joyful when you're happy, you give praise when worthy, and so on and so forth. When you tell a people as a whole, when you buy into the idea that we're never actually allowed to be sad, we're never allowed to say that the world and everything around it is getting too heavy for us, you really strip back someone's humanity, and those things can't be replaced by successes, be they material successes or having a good family around you, or even attending religious services and things like that. Though that element of Black humanity can't be replaced. So we really need to start to see ourselves as people who, everyone can be strong, but everyone can also feel at times that they can't be strong 100% of the time. I think we need to really address our ideas of what Black strength is.
That's a very good question, actually, and very good question to pose to Twitter. So has hypermasculinity affected you? So please do let us know. Remember to use the hashtag VCPODCAST. So Chama, Toby, what can we actually do? So you've said we need to address the issue. Could you give us some more tangible advice as to what we could do, what we could all do today to target this mental health sort of epidemic head on?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is if you or anybody you know is showing signs of any kind of mental health issues, if you feel like your everyday activities are affected by thoughts, constant thoughts on a constant basis, then there could be something, there could be an issue, in which case I would say do not hesitate to go and see a professional. I'd say go and see your GP. GPs aren't always great when it comes to mental health. I'll be 100% honest with you. And as you said at the start, black men are more likely to be referred to either criminal services or not be seen to properly. I'd also say look up the impart service in your local area, the local mental health NHS services in your area, if you don't have a good relationship with your GP. And if you're a friend or a family member of someone who you feel like, you know what, they haven't been themselves for a while, it's been a bit of a consistent change in that person's either behavior or mood, and you really start to get concerned, I'd say the first thing to do is seek serious medical health. These services are here to help. They're here to help everybody in the United Kingdom, not just non-black people. So you use those services is what I would say first and foremost, and try and reach out to people like me, to people who write and talk about this. It can be quite isolating. I've never spoken to a black person who had a mental health diagnosis who didn't feel isolated. So if you type, I honestly have found that Twitter was one of the best things I discovered when it came to mental health and being black, in terms of finding people like, I mean, I've got a mental health diagnosis, so finding people like me, it truly helped. And the final one I would say is look up Depression Alliance, who they have it's not therapy, it's just a chance to sit down with other people who've been diagnosed and in a safe space just talk about everyday problems. Those things will help normalize these issues and make them take them out of the dark just a little bit. So those are 3 pieces of advice I would give.
And is there anything, so obviously this affects young people also, and is there anything that as a young person we can do to just maintain our mental health the same way we would maintain our physical fitness? I'm going to open this up to anybody in the panel.
I mean, in my opinion, is definitely if something makes you happy and you enjoy doing it, do it. I think as young people in this era, I actually had this conversation earlier today, we're so focused in everything having an end point. You must be achieving your goals, you must be working towards your career, you must be working towards financial stability and all these things. Look at house prices in London. We've got to make sure you're well paid in order to. I mean, if you enjoy doing something for the sake of enjoying doing it, never let it go for anything, because without your mental health, anything you can win will very easily be lost. And like Sam Sapong is a very, very tragic example of that you can win in everywhere, but if you've lost your mental health, you're not going to really be here to enjoy that. So yeah, to young people, I'd say definitely the things you enjoy doing for the sake of doing them, continue to do them. Always find time to speak to friends and to, I wouldn't say meditate necessarily, but to just notice the world around you. And it only has to be like 10 minutes a day, just not have anything going on around you. No Twitter, no Facebook, no phone, no WhatsApp, just you and peace. Find time for peace, find time to enjoy things you enjoy for the sake of enjoying them.
No, I think that's excellent advice. Mel, what's Twitter saying?
So we've got a tweet from, they call her Toby, and I thought this was quite an interesting point about how the stereotype of being a strong black woman or a strong black man might allow for mental illnesses to be trivialized. So I don't know if that's anything that any of you want to discuss, based on the fact that that might cover some other topics as well.
Can I chip in?
Yeah, of course.
Hi, yep, Sienna here. I think it's been covered really well, obviously by Chama and Toby, but I think it's this idea of black people, black women and black men being born to suffer. Really, this idea that black women are the mules of the world, and even just this idea that we were born to look after everyone else, from black men to white families and stuff like that. This idea that we were born to suffer, and in turn this idea that I guess for black men to reclaim their masculinity from all the kind of trauma of what has come before, really, they have to be strong and not speak. And this is something, you know, we within our community perpetuate. So you get a lot of black women saying that I want a strong black man, and you'll also get, you know, on Twitter there was a hashtag recently, you know, something kind of like, you know, hashtag why I love black women, and overwhelmingly so many of the tweets were about our capacity to suffer and to carry the burdens of the world, which is rather tragic, really, to be honest. It says a lot. So I think the idea of trauma in our community is really key. I think it's something that's played down and denied often. I think it's something that other races, you know, believe that we're strong and all these kinds of things, and it comes through in things like kind of as I said, social media, but also advertising and in kind of just everyday language too. And I think, you know, it's something that we're all kind of perpetuating, and there's nothing wrong with being strong, but I think it's this idea that we've taken it to the point where so much of our humanity has been stripped and our dignity has been taken away. The only way for us to almost feel like we have something and some kind of, I suppose it's to do with ego as well, is for us to kind of believe that we're strong and we, you know, not show any weakness or cracks, essentially, even though there are probably a lot of things going on the inside.
Exactly. And fantastic. And I don't want to seem like I'm rushing, but we have to go on to the next topic so that we can, you know, get everything in. So thank you very much for that, Sienna. So the next topic is Black women in leadership. Let me start off with the good news, because I think we started off quite depressing with the suicide story, the story of suicide. So the good news is that, you know, Baroness Valerie Amos, who was the first black woman to take charge of a British university earlier this year. And following her, Baroness Doreen Lawrence has also been announced as being the new Chancellor of De Montfort University. So we are progressing, black women are progressing in terms of leadership. However, there's still not enough of us running huge corporations. And there's still not enough of us at the top of the corporate ladder, or in terms of other industries also. So Mariam, I know you run WCAN. So why do you think there's such a disparity between the amount of black women in like the corporate office versus, say, white men?
I think for me, in terms of in the corporate world, black women are almost unseen, if I can say that. I think a lot of the time it's not a case of us not really wanting it. I mean, there was a really interesting study that was done a few months back about women want 5 things, and it was said that, you know, with black women, they aspire to like prestigious titles. You know, they're more likely to have long-term career goals and more confident that they can succeed in a position of power, but we're not seen there. And a lot of people say that it's because, unfortunately, we're not seen. I mean, when you think about a black executive or a black CEO, in your head, I think what people do is they visualize a black man. And when they think of a woman like executive or a woman CEO, what they'll visualize is a white woman. So what it is that we're kind of just almost eliminated from these two different sectors. You know, we're not the buzzword, we're not the visual image for black, and we're not the buzz visual image for a woman either. So I think a lot of the time we end up getting overlooked. I don't really think it's a lack of, you know, us not wanting it, us not working hard, or us not, you know, going for it. I think a lot of the time it's just the opportunity to be brought there is often overlooked in favor of other groups. That's my personal, the way I see it.
That's actually quite interesting how you've put that, and I think that's very true. You know, we often don't, when people say feminism or women, we often don't come under the umbrella of woman when, you know, it's not what people imagine, a black woman. So that is really interesting. And Diana, you if you could come in here, why is it important for the workplace to say be diverse? Is there any sort of advantages? Like if I'm CEO, if I'm a white man and CEO of a big corporate, why is it in my interest to hire you and make you sort of my equal or above me?
Well, in the corporate world, it looks like women are making significant strides. This year's Fortune 500 list boasted 18 female CEO. So you would see that more women or more black females are making more impact equal to the male CEOs. But despite those gains, black women aren't faring quite as well, facing harsher penalties than other leaders when organization fails. So I would say um, the corporate world should learn to understand and refine our strengths as black CEOs or black women CEOs, and how best we use them to support and lead within our organizations.
Can I also just say, I think it's also a case of, I know this was mentioned before, but like unconscious bias. And a lot of people, I think they use this word wrong when it comes to black women. There is unconscious bias across the whole of the corporate world. It's just the way human psychology works. If I see someone who went to the same school as me, I'm going to be more favorable to look at their CV. That's just the way it's going to work. But I think the unconscious bias is more than just hiring in your own image. I think it's more that there's a bias against black women. You know, I don't think it's necessarily that they don't want to, they're not seeing enough of them at the top to bring them up. I mean, that's one side. But then I think there is just a general way in which black women are seen or not seen across, you know, all avenues, not just in the corporate world. So, you know, I think that also plays quite a big role in it.
And I definitely agree. And Sienna, perhaps you could come in here because you're quite big on black feminism. And even going away from the corporate world, if we're looking at higher education and professors, etc., there's this disparity there. Do you think it's for the same reasons as Mariam is saying it is for the corporate world, or do you think other factors come into play?
Well, I think before I go on to sort of academia, I was going to say I think it's interesting that when we talk about leadership, we straight away think of the corporate world. I think it's all great that there are these small wins in places like that, but that doesn't affect most black women's ordinary day life. So in some ways, the corporate world and wins there are quite irrelevant to someone like me, if I'm completely honest. I think what's interesting, though, in terms of a theme that is in the corporate world and that's in grassroots work and that's in academia, it's this idea of black women are actually present, but we're present in the lowest positions, or we're present behind the scenes. So with a foundation, so you'll have trust me, most of these corporate places, there'll be a black cleaner, that's for sure, and she may well be a black woman, but it's this idea of black women are often the unsung heroes. So in terms of kind of grassroots movements, well, black women often lead these things. The Black Lives Matter movement is being led by black women. South All Black Sisters, Sisters Uncut, you know, Sisters of Frida, all these kind of organizations on the front line, black women are leading them. Of course, there's no payment or any good payment, and often you're an unsung hero, you're not celebrated. And I think, you know, in terms of that, it's the idea that, you know, I think black women, apart from, and with black men too, apart from if we're literally being celebrated on the sports field, sports for our physical ability, and even then, look at what happens to Serena. Like, she's the world's greatest, and she's still treated as black women, as black women are treated, still treated negatively. So I think it's the idea that people don't ever want us to be at the top. And as was said so brilliantly by someone before, when you think of woman, you do not think of black woman, you think of white woman. And when you think of blackness, you do not think of black woman, you think of black man. So we find ourselves in a complicated intersection of race and gender, and often class as well. So I think it's really across the board, and you know, small wins in these kind of corporate spaces, sure, that's great, but it doesn't affect the day-to-day life of most of us.
You know what I would say about that, the corporate comment? I don't think it's that our focus is that's the only representation of leadership, but I think, you know, this is a capitalist, you know, world. Like, this is the way we work. The corporates seem to hold a lot of the power because a lot of things go through the corporates and corporations. So when you start to see representation of us in those areas, it just automatically relays into some sort of a positive, you know, it's just about representation, I think. And I think it's easiest for us to focus on corporates because basically corporations run this world. So I think it's more that than that's the only place that we see leadership.
No, that's not what I said, though. I didn't say that's the only place we see leadership. I've said it's interesting that was our sort of
our go-to. But I think there is quite a good reason for that go-to, and it does make sense for us to start there at the very least and get representation in the places where it really matters, because at the end of the day, money talks. So
I disagree. I don't think that the corporate world is the only place that matters for representation. I think it's one of the places that you want to see black faces in, but even then, it's about meaningful representation. I don't think it's good enough to just have, for instance, a black president who does nothing for black people. So I'm all about meaningful representation in these spaces.
Okay, so despite whether it's the corporate world or academia or wherever, how do you remedy the situation? Because in either of these places, we're not very highly represented. So how would we remedy the situation to make sure that we are getting those jobs and we are at the top of whatever organization it may be, or we are starting our own organizations maybe?
I think part of it is definitely, again, as I said, kind of meaningful representation. And another thing is kind of what we've been taught, again, because of capitalist society, is that there's only room for one at the top. So there's only room for one of us wherever we go. And when you have only one of us, that means there's no community and no team to actually help you make a difference. So I think what would be a key thing is, in terms of kind of wider black society, is a community spirit of kind of, if I get somewhere, don't look at it as, oh, there's only room for me. Look at it as, okay, I need to be someone who's going to do something positive in this space and hopefully pave the way for others to come forth. And not saying like just bring anyone along, but I think it's the idea of being open and understanding that when you go somewhere, hopefully you don't see it as just, this is something for me. You want to see it as a long-term gain, a long-term win, where you being there means something to other people, and you makes it easier for the next load, so then it's 2s and 3s and 4s and never just the one person. So yeah, it's about bringing people in a kind of meaningful way.
I agree. I do think it is about bringing people in, but then I often think that, I don't know, a lot of the time black people do get accused of, you know, the ones that get to the top, we're not willing to help those at the bottom, which is, you know, for me personally, that's something, I'm not even anywhere near the top, but I know that there are certain things, like from the corporate world, certain, you know, tidbits that I can give to people that I'm more than happy to give to everybody, just because I feel like I need to see more people who look like me around me. So I think that is on a personal level, that's something we can do. But then on a wider level, I think it's all about making sure that we're not falling behind in any areas. And I know a lot of people say that, you know, we can't help from a social, you know, or a class level, we can't help those things. But I think it's really from doing it from the early stages, no matter where you're coming from, just making sure you have that accessibility to what you can be, as opposed to always thinking, not even knowing what's there for you to become, and staying in a position where you're not. So, I mean, I guess that's my input.
And in terms of being
to chip in very briefly, if I can, just for Diana, because I'm receiving quite a few messages in regards to her journey. I just wanted to ask you, Diana, as the CEO of Africa Fashion Week Amsterdam, and being a black woman, what's the biggest motivator or the biggest thing you've used to overcome obstacles that you may have faced, not just being a CEO of your particular company or organization, but just being a CEO in general? What do you feel people need to have nowadays, especially black women?
Well, I wouldn't really say I faced an obstacle. It's just that being the CEO of such an immense company, you have everybody looking up to you. I've got 30 staff working for me as we speak, and it's quite a challenge to to be there at the top and share the work. How can I put this? You know, do you have other people? Because I've got white folk working for me, even white men who are CEOs of 7 other companies who are working under my company, and everybody keeps asking themselves, but how is she able to manage these people? And on the other side, you have the white CEOs or the white people who are thinking, will she even make it? Will she make it to the third edition? Will she make it to the 5th edition? Is she able to manage the organization successfully? And then you have investors who are willing to chip in money into the company or into the event. And what they keep asking themselves is, okay, it's a young black female who owns this organization, and they're skeptical about putting into money because they are not sure that it will yield in the next years, or in, you know, they're able to make the money back. And that's one of the challenges that we face as a young black CEO in the corporate world.
So how have you overcome it? Is it just being good at what you do, so good
Well,
that people have to recognize you?
Well, I've just maintained you need to believe in yourself and believe in what you do, and everything just falls into place. Because I started doing the event 2 years ago, and this was my second edition, and I had this investor who actually, the first year he was a sponsor because he didn't believe in the event, and now he's an investor owning 50% stock of the event.
Oh, wow.
Because I was consistent and I was persistent, and I believed in what I do, and I told him, look, you don't really have to be an investor if you don't want to, and I'm not going to beg you to be, but you just sit aside and keep watching from being the sponsor to being the 50% and only 50% stock in the organization. That means you must have trusted, or you must have been convinced in what I actually do, or how I get about my business.
I just wanted to.
Can I chip in?
I was just gonna add to that. Don't you often feel as though, as black women, we have to be perfect almost? We have to overcompensate to get the recognition that we deserve, and I feel like we work hard enough for. I feel a lot of the time, from what you've said, that you have to almost prove yourself a lot more than any other group would have to. And I just feel like that's also the problem, is that it's back to that thing of us not really being seen the way we should be seen, and us always having to overcompensate, overdo work, like do excellent work all the time, no rooms for mistakes, and that links back into the whole strong black woman thing as well. You know, it's a constant thing that's thrown at us, and it's I personally, I mean, it doesn't work for me, but you have to play up to it at the end of the day.
Yes, you do. Oh yeah, you go.
On that, I just wanted to say that first of all, Mariam, you mentioned that as black women, they tend to have higher aspirations, and that might also be the root of the problem in terms of having aims outside of those corporates, using corporates as a springboard to do other things, meaning that they're not seen at those higher levels within the corporates, but they're seen doing other things elsewhere. And the second thing was also, instead of us also thinking of the constraints ahead in the society, the corporate society or the workplace we're moving into, and the restraints from the leadership, I also want you guys to be thinking about the societal restraints that we have faced in our own communities that hold us back from moving into these things. And I also want to hear some guys share their opinion as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll go. I mean, firstly, we need to recognize that there's almost a real compounded challenge here, because on the one hand you've got the intersection of what is both a diversity issue in the black community and then a diversity issue in the women's space, and then you've got the intersection of both. So I mean, it's a double challenge, and also the remedies will have to sort of tap into remedies on both sides. I think, if based on my own time in the corporate world, I think something that I've seen a lot is that if you look at the pipeline of people coming through and people reaching the top, often there's a lot of promise in the earlier stages, but where it always almost seems to fall down, whether you're looking at women, whether you're looking at ethnic minorities, is in the middle management space. And I think that's an area that needs to be targeted. And it's either one of two things, or three things, I would say. So the first thing is overcoming challenges and people being able to see the role models they can aspire to. So, for example, being able to see significant people who look like you in a part of an organization that you can aspire to, and also plot your own journey in order to do that, as well as overcoming some of the challenges which have been mentioned here. But on the other hand, there's also something which doesn't get spoken about much, which is people actually drop out themselves. Because, I mean, taking the corporate world as an example, people find that they get to a certain stage in the environment that they find themselves in, or when they look at what leadership means, it's not actually the sort of life they want to live. So we have to also address the environment and think to ourselves, if we want to get certain people with a certain a certain demographic through, what are the sorts of environments that they're inspiring to or aspiring to be part of. And I think finally, this is something which I think is relevant for any sort of marginalized group in society. I think we can, and I say this as a black male, I think sometimes we can be overly focused on what makes us different, and that creates problems in the environments which we find ourselves, where actually those around us are perhaps not as aware of our differences as we are for ourselves.
Fantastic, and I would agree very much with what you said, and I know that Toby, this is something that you wanted to add something to?
Yeah, definitely. Well, to be honest, Charles has actually covered quite a bit of what I wanted to discuss. I mean, everyone has, shared very, very vital points. But I also like to take it back to, people that are aiming to get to the top, opposed to people that are at the top. I mean, I think it's great, you would have a black woman CEO, but I think if you need to, like, I think Sienna mentioned already that, we shouldn't see it as, okay, one person's up there, there's only space for one person. I also think that, especially maybe in the corporate world, or even in, like, I work in media, it's very, very good to support. But I tend to find that, black women are less likely to, to go to other black women for support. I feel that we should kind of, I don't know, merge or create a culture of actually networking. I mean, I don't know if people fully understand how important it is to network and to build relationships in the industries that you wish to work in. So I think what everyone has said is great, but we should also recognize that, as people that want to get to those places, we really do need to work on approaching these people, granted that they are approachable.
Networking is definitely a great tip. And Mariam, if you could just give us one last tip and maybe one last comment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I really agree with what Toby said about networking, which is why I set up WCAN. I thought it was so important for us to have a network of black women professionals who are looking to go into the same industry to support each other. But then I also think that one thing we haven't really touched on is it is down to the men as well. It's not just about us women all going together and, bringing ourselves up. That's one side to it. But at the end of the day, if you look at the people at the top, they are men. And if men don't make an active effort in order to bring people from middle management or wherever to sponsor them to come up, because that's what this world is all about, who you know and who's going to sponsor you. If men don't make that active effort, it's not going to happen, and we're going to remain in this exactly the way it is. So I think it's a two-sided solution. It's not just us developing networks, it's also us reaching out to the people who probably wouldn't look at us and see themselves.
No, I definitely believe that men need to be very much involved in order so that we can see equality. Diana, would you say that that's something you would agree with? And could you also just give us one last piece of advice as to how we can remedy this disparity between black women and other demographics at the top of their professions?
Yeah, exactly. I think the corporate world, or let me say the men in the corporate world, should understand and refine our strengths as black women CEO, and how best we use them to support and lead within our organization.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much. We're going to move on to our next topic. So, for many of us, we are recent grads or in the process of our degrees, in the hope that this will provide us with a good foundation to launch our careers. However, in addition, we are also likely to have parents or grandparents from Africa or the Caribbean, which begs the question, should we be considering moving back to Africa or the Caribbean to invest in these countries? So Charles, I know you have run a company, Move Me Back. Do you want to just say what is the incentive to moving back? Why should we be considering this?
Sure, thank you, Naomi. Yeah, so I think a lot of if I was to describe my work now, it's almost 100% focused on Africa. And for my own personal reasons, why I shifted from doing a lot of work is starting as a consultant and then going as an entrepreneur and working in Europe and in the US, and shifting my focus to Africa was primarily around two things. Number one, the scale and the size of the opportunity that exists there as an emerging economy, if you want to look at it as one continent or a number of countries within a continent, but also number two, the scale of impact which can be made in terms of people's lives and how you can actually be a part of creating something. And I think those are the two headlines for how I would encourage others to think about their own careers and whether they make that move. On the one hand, there's huge opportunity if you want to look at it from a professional career point of view, if you want to look at it from an entrepreneurial or even a personal commercial point of view. But also, I think a lot of people, when you actually speak with them and get beneath the surface of what they're trying to achieve, they're trying to make impact in the world, they're trying to make a difference. There is a real opportunity there. So I would class those two things as two big criteria that people should consider.
So are you saying that in order to move back to Africa or the Caribbean, you would need some entrepreneurial skills? Are there any opportunities, like grad opportunities, graduate schemes, or is this something really that you would have to initiate by yourself and move forward by yourself as a business?
Yeah, so there are plenty of opportunities. I think one of the biggest challenges which I guess supports the work that we do and gives us a reason for being is that Africa suffers from a real talent the talent mobility issue or the talent access issue. So there are a lot of talented and skilled people on the continent. However, what you find is organizations struggling to find those who have the right intersection of skill, experience, and perspective to deliver on their plans. And this is where I feel graduates, particularly those who have been Western educated and particularly those who have also had a little bit of work experience behind them, could find themselves in a position where their skills and their experience and also the perspective that they have is heavily sought after. We work with a number of organizations, from retail organizations through to banks, through to even startups, who are looking for people who have that intersection which I've mentioned. So there's a lot of opportunity both in the entrepreneurial space but the professional space too.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's really important because I went to a conference the other day and they were saying there isn't that much opportunities for graduates. But if you're saying what countries would you suggest have the most opportunities for graduates?
So this is an interesting one. I think if I look across the entire continent, the opportunities are abundant everywhere. There are obvious regions in which we work and hence have a better or clearer view of, the Nigerias, the Ghanas, the Kenyas, the Tanzanias, the South Africas of the world. But I think generally speaking, it's actually the countries which perhaps don't make it into the limelight as much where you see a lot of growth. If you look at a Rwanda, if you look at an Ethiopia, if you look at, for example, Ethiopia and what's happening there from a fashion production point of view, it's becoming the hub for where Africa will take the lead in fashion manufacturing. If you look at other places such as Rwanda's going through a huge rise in its agriculture and solving some of the problems that exist in Africa, for example, around the fact that 80% of our food is imported. So there are opportunities everywhere, and I think that what's more relevant for individuals as they go on their decision journey is where do they want to base themselves? What type of opportunities are they looking for? Because we often describe Africa as one place, but there's a lot of diversity. And as I mentioned, if you're looking potentially to do something in manufacturing and fashion, maybe you go to Ethiopia. But also, what are your roots? What are your background? Where are you going to be most comfortable?
Yeah.
Can I chip in here very briefly? Just very briefly. Charles, being, for example, a voice of someone who's part of the diaspora, coming like your mum or your dad or both may have come to this country, had you here, you're born and raised here, but you're originally maybe from Nigeria, Ghana, or some other lovely country, preferably in West Africa. Why? No, I'm joking. Why would I want to move back? Because this is a concept that many people who I know are battling with, mentally in particular, but they've got to a stage where they feel quote unquote it's too late because they've worked so hard getting to a point in their academic career where they've done well. They're going to great universities. They've got maybe offers from certain firms, maybe not necessarily in the city, but talking about the media firms as well, or they've got great careers in regards to being in the creative and arts. Why should we move back if we're diaspora? We aren't people. Lots of people feel they aren't necessarily. There's a phrase in Nigeria. People use the term ajebota. They're not necessarily from back home, if you understand what I'm saying. So it's like starting again if you do go back home. And why should you do that when you have dedicated and invested 19, 20, 21 years here, and you've got to the point where finally you can get a job that brings some nice meals to the table. Now someone's telling you to go back. You're like, move me back where? So where do you stand with that sort of mentality of this young up and coming class of diaspora who have achieved quite highly when it comes to education, and now they're looking to go into top firms, again, not necessarily within professional services, but mainly in this country? What do you say to that person?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So firstly, just to answer that open question around beautiful countries, mine happens to be Ghana. So I just wanted to put that out there. But anyway, to go on to answer your question, I mean, part of the reason why we started this organization was to create some transparency around what was going on the continent. I think the answer to your question is actually quite the contrary to perhaps some of the fears that people have. Firstly, it's important to know that it's important for people to realize that the reason we are promoting African opportunities is not because we believe we have this perfect view of the world that all Africans should return back to Africa and move back, so to speak. It is the fact that there is a huge amount of opportunity and a huge amount of activity which is going on the continent, and it often goes under the radar. There's a real lack of transparency around where the opportunities are, and once people identify the opportunities, how they can potentially move to those opportunities. I'm a big advocate of people ultimately doing what is best for them. And the challenge that I've seen over the last few years is I look at let's say the Afro-Caribbean community, if I look at Africans in particular, and I think that for a long time we've been struggling to sort of get to the top, and now I look at a number of the different groups of Africans and Black people who are doing exceptionally well in the UK, which is ultimately where I'm based. But you look at it and you think, well, hey, we're kind of getting quite close to the top, but are we a little bit late? And then you look across, you look across the sort of the ocean, and you go back to the continent, and you see the figures of the double-digit growth. You look at what's going to happen by 2050 in terms of the GDP of Africa and how that will relate to potentially being bigger than Europe and America combined than it is today, 29 trillion versus 2 trillion today. You look at the fact that we've got the 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies over the last few years, and we've got private consumption which is higher in India and Russia. You take all of that into consideration, and you think, hold on a minute. For some of the best equipped people who have the education, they have the experience, they have the perspective, and they also have a little bit of a competitive advantage over the rest of the world in the sense that they may not have lived in Africa, but they understand it, even if it's through their parents' eyes, are not capitalizing on these opportunities. And that's what we're trying to do. And then to address the point around, the feeling of losing something, it is completely the contrary. Firstly, both education and also professional experience, which has been gained in the Western world, is held in very good stead on the continent. Of course, there was a challenge over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, or even longer, of people perhaps going back with the wrong attitude, thinking that, hey, this is a one-way. If I have a Western education and professional experience, this is a one-way ticket to taking the CEO's job. It is not, right? Yeah. You've got a lot of learning to do. However, it puts you in great stead both in terms of credibility, but also the things that you have experienced, which people who are on the ground potentially haven't, because the economies have just not reached that stage yet.
I just wanted to mention a few points from the Twitter. So we've got Ask Your Mama. It says so many people want to move back to the homeland yet know nothing about the environment, economy, or the people.
Yeah, real talk.
We've got some from Raifa that says, would any of you guys as grad schemers leave your 40k or so salary to invest your talents in Africa? What's stopping you? We also have some questions about whether we're responsible for the success of our motherland, bearing in mind some of us might have been here for generations and been very much rooted in the UK. Do we owe Africa anything?
I think those are very good questions. Let's pick up Raifa's questions. What's stopping us from moving to Africa? So maybe, Charles, you could sort of outline some of the issues that people face when trying to move, say, from the UK back to Africa or the Caribbean, and how we can sort of overcome, how do we make that transition possible?
And especially how Move Me Back, your company, helps with this.
Sure. So I think the biggest challenge is actually a challenge of fear of the unknown, and I believe that's one of the areas where us as Move Me Back and others can help, because I think there is something around, if we can expose the reality, and let's stay away from the overly pessimistic story, let's stay away from the overly optimistic story, let's just tell the real story of what people like ourselves are doing and how they're going about it. That is probably one of the biggest things we can do to solve the first challenge, which is fear of the unknown. That's the first thing. The second thing is what I've already alluded to, and potentially you could say is the first thing, is the transparency of the opportunities, because based on what you read in the news, based on what you might see in the classified or wherever, you're not going to really get any real sense of the scale of the opportunities that exist, both at a macro level but at an individual level. So that's another area where Move Me Back is specifically focused around trying to, we go into the markets, we have relationships with our clients, and we're exposing as many opportunities as we can and helping people to go through the process whilst trying to cater for the intricacies on the African organization side, and intricacies on the person moving back side, some of the challenges around salary or logistics, etc. And that's the role that we are trying to play, is almost as an intermediary to make sure that connect happens. Other aspects of challenge are more logistical and practical. So where do I live? How much do I spend? If I'm going to Nigeria, for example, so I budget for rent, and then I budget double that for running my generator. And then what do I do in terms of getting around and all of these other sorts of things? What do I do for malaria? I mean, am I taking tablets for the rest of my life, or do I actually take myself off tablets? All of these smaller things, which actually can be solved through having a community of people and helping them to interact and helping them to share their stories and how they've solved things themselves. And that's another thing that we're trying to do there.
Sorry, can I jump in there just quickly? I want to ask Charles something. Yeah, Charles, I was just wondering, when you were talking about the earlier at the start, you're talking about the kind of people that you're looking for, that African industries are looking for over here. I did notice it was skewed to entrepreneurs and people in professional services. And someone like me, and I know, and I'm friends with a lot of Black people who work more within the arts and creative industries. Is that something you focus on? Are there any opportunities for people who aren't business-minded, quote unquote, to want to go back to Africa? Because I saw somebody tweeted thinking about the skills that you offer, and I think it's important, anyone who goes back home, wherever home may be, to think, what skills can I actually offer, what value can I bring? And I always wonder myself, as someone who's more skewed towards creativity and sees myself working in creative industries, do people like us have anything to offer back home?
And also, Charles, just very briefly, if you could just include this in your answer. I've received a message or a couple messages from a good friend called Faustino, who's from the Caribbean, and he wants more insight in regards to how would the future look with such a platform or infrastructure in some of the countries in the Caribbean, because more often than not, it seems these great opportunities through organizations like Move Me Back, or this talk of diaspora refers predominantly to not just Africa but certain parts of Africa. So do you see any sort of things happening in the future in regards to the Caribbean?
Sure. So yeah, thank you. Two very good questions. Firstly, Chama, to take your question. Firstly, apologies for if I made it seem as though it's only for entrepreneurial or professional type skills. The irony is, the skill set that you have is what I would class as most in demand right now, or should even be most in demand, or will see a trend of being most in demand over time. I think for far too long, the African economies have excluded creative industries and other industries from essentially having a seat at the table. And what you realize in any sophisticated economy, in any sophisticated market, is actually a lot of the time the creative industries and some of the other alternative industries, from an international trade and an international reputational point of view, have a very, very big role to play. If you look at the UK, if you look at the US, if you look at what, for example, how the sports industries are used and how those are used as exports, if you look at major tourism hubs and how they manage their image and manage their culture, even if you look at the UK and how the Queen, the monarchy, the changing of the guard, all of those things are part of exports of our culture. African economies, African markets, African governments need this sort of stuff. Organizations need this sort of stuff. The levels of sophistication when it comes to branding, when it comes to communication, they are just not there yet to compete on an international level. And organizations need individuals like you. So whilst it may not be an area of priority in the past, this is, for us as an organization, an area that we want to prioritize, and I think for organizations in general, it's something that they want to prioritize. So I hope that answers your question. With regards to Peter's question around the Caribbean, if we take what we've done with Move Me Back, it's a platform, it's a model, it's a way of exposing what is going on. And if you look at Africa, if you look at, we have a challenge in the sense that we are Anglophone African, and so if we look at most of our opportunities and most of our work, it has been to date skewed towards English-speaking Africa. We're trying to transition that towards French-speaking Africa. There is a process. The same applies for the Caribbean. The Caribbean it's almost a micro version, I would say, of Africa. It has its own intricacies. It's a different economy. However, it has the same sorts of challenges, but also the same sorts of opportunities that Africa does. If you look at the Caribbean, if you look at the stats and the amount of imports that come from the US and other parts of the world versus what could be produced on resource-rich land with huge labor forces and skilled labor forces, the equal opportunities exist there. So to try and round up, what we've done with Move Me Back, it's a template. That template can be taken to anywhere, and the Caribbean is somewhere where I hope that we will see it spread to, or someone else will beat us to it, but the opportunity is there.
Do you think it's a bit arrogant of us, for say someone like me who's just graduated from university, to say that we could go abroad, say to Nigeria or wherever, and set up a business and it thrive, given that I haven't had much experience? How do we overcome this ideology of being superior or better than because we've been educated in the West?
Yeah, arrogant. Some people may say that. As far as I'm concerned, if that's what gets you there, then so be it. Through the process, you will find that it's difficult. Building a business anywhere is very difficult, especially in Africa, where you have so much to think about. You have organizations that vertically integrate because they can't rely on services such as, they can't rely on services. You can't call up a DHL necessarily and have all of your delivery taken care of. So if that's what it takes to get you there, fine. I think through the process, people from the diaspora will realize that it's not easy, but with the challenge comes great reward. On that note, it is worth understanding where, as diaspora, we have advantages and perhaps where we don't have advantages. So sometimes I would argue, if you are outside of, if you have an understanding of a market, but you don't know it intimately, sometimes you are better positioned to build businesses, or to build businesses that are what we call disruptive. A lot of the time when you have individuals who have grown up and been within a market, they usually acclimatize to the way things are done. One of the key things of entrepreneurship and startups and to that end is around changing the status quo, challenging the way things are done.
Can I just chip in there actually on that point, because it's just a small point, really, just off the back of what Nai has said. Like, definitely think it's true. I mean, I used to work at the Financial Times on the Africa desk, specifically at a subsidiary that focused on finance and African business. So I learned a lot about these things actually. And you know, there was of course the arrogance of the kind of the white people and the Westerners that I worked with in terms of thinking that they knew what was best for Africa and the businesses that we kind of wrote about and stuff. But I think what's really important for we, the children of the diaspora, is to understand that although, yeah, we've been raised in the West, so we, again, whether we like it or not, probably have internalized some of these West is best ideas. And I think it's interesting that you'd say, I mean, if it's arrogance that gets you there, then so what? But I think there's definitely room to think about the fact that we don't know what's best for like an entire continent, that a lot of us don't really understand or have the nuances. Some of us, yeah, sure, have like grown up there. Some people were educated there at some point, but I think a lot of people, black or white or whatever, go to Africa and use it as kind of its playground, use it as kind of place to practice things, and then, you know, if you mess up, then you mess up and move on, kind of thing. So I think like I would just be careful with that kind of mindset of people like who've just come out of university with not much in terms of life skills, going and telling people like how things should run in their world. And I think we definitely have a problem with people using one model and assuming it works everywhere in Africa. It's a diverse continent rather than country, as so many of us treat it as if it's just a country.
Most definitely. We can definitely forget that there's 54 countries. Well, is there anything that anybody's saying on Twitter?
Yeah, so we've got loads of activity on the Twitter. We have Dara talking about how Charles is really has really changed the topic in the sense of why were we worrying about diversity before, when there's so many great opportunities in Africa. And then we have a lot of people like Yemisi Rants and a few others talking about the sense of identity in terms of that could play into the whole role of why we're hesitant to move back, because some people might feel more British than they are, let's say, Kenyan or Ugandan, than they would feel is that sense of who am I? There's also the fact that a lot of people seem to, like we've mentioned, feel arrogant about their assumptions of their Western education and where that would put them. I saw another interesting point about how a lot of people would say that they stay in the UK to gain certain skills from their roles to start their career, to then move back to Africa and then find that they're stuck in the rat race. So that moves on to, and another comment from Sammy Senior that said that one restraint might be the really low salaries that you gain, for example, from your youth service. So that leads to a question of, when do you think is the best time to move back? If it's at the beginning of your career as a graduate, or later on as you've gained skills, or when do you think is the best time to go?
So these questions they're challenging, and the reason why they're challenging is because there's not one answer that fits everybody. If I think of those who move earlier, they have an advantage in the sense that if you look at, and I apologize that in these sorts of conversations we end up talking about Africa as one whole, as the very people who should be speaking it in its full diversity. However, I guess it's convenient. But if you look at Africa and you look at where it is on its growth curve, I think that the opportunity, or the window of opportunity, is closing. And not to sound negative, but the window of opportunity to really get involved and to really shape things, maybe we're looking at 10-15 years. So those who move earlier will have some form of first mover advantage. As has been alluded to from a number of people speaking here, there is a process of understanding and learning the environment, and nobody, regardless of where you're from, can necessarily just arrive on the ground and know how to make things work and know what the answers are. So there is a process of learning. The sooner you move, the sooner you start, the better. So I would say for those who are potentially looking at more entrepreneurial tracks, maybe sooner is better than later. For those who are looking for to do things in the professional world, perhaps there's more of a debate to be had. So on the one hand, the education is something, yes, but professional experience is probably so much more. If you can go into an African market with both strong education, professional experience, and appreciation for the market, then you're in quite a strong position. So perhaps that for some people, that 1 to 2 year of professional experience may be a better point at which to launch their careers, but not necessarily. The other thing to consider is if you go into an environment which is by definition less structured, and therefore organizations are less structured, when you join an organization like that, yes, you may not have as much support, you may not have as much formal training, but in terms of your path through that organization, in terms of responsibility that you can get very early on, in terms of the sorts of problems you'll be solving, you're solving growth problems. You're not solving survival problems. Look at the UK financial sector. When you join a bank here, consider some of the things that you will be working on in the environment in which you're working on versus an environment where there is so much growth to be had. So it swings and roundabouts, but it very much depends on the individual and ultimately research and a little bit of testing.
And so to round up, if there were 3 pieces of advice that you could give people who are considering moving to either Africa or the Caribbean or South America, what would those pieces of advice be?
That's a very good question. The first thing would be, as with everything in life, really understand yourself and why you are looking for those opportunities. Understand what it is you want from your career. Look at it as a 10, 15, 20-year horizon. What is the mark that you want to make? Do you want to make loads of money? Do you want to make impact? Is it something which is a combination of 2? Do you want to do entrepreneurial? Do you want to do professional? Really, really important questions. And you may not have the answers to those questions. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, don't make assumptions. Try and engineer ways for you to test these things. One thing that we are really focused on trying to do with Move Me Back is create the channels through which people can start sampling either working in African professional environments, even if it's not in Africa, but environments which are Africa focused, or in some shape or form starting to think about African solutions. You should engineer the opportunities for yourself to try and test things yourself. Don't listen to what I say, don't listen to what other people say. Find a way to try it for yourself in a safe environment or in a structured environment. That's number 2. And then number 3, I would say, is use a service like us, use services that are available to you. It's ultimately gathering information and accessibility to the opportunities. Don't assume that the opportunities are limited to what you see on the surface. Keep digging, because there's a lot of really interesting things there. So I guess in what I'm trying to say on that third point is do your research. And if I would maybe go one step further to a fourth item, I would say, well, linked with doing your research, find yourself in communities and with groups of people who are looking for the same thing, because those groups can be incredibly powerful. And then finally, number 4 is do not ever allow fear to be a reason not to do anything, or fear or something being different. So
brilliant, thank you so much.
And if I can, just very briefly, I just wanted to
if you could just tell us where we can find, because you've given us a lot of advice, so if you could just tell us your website and where we can find you for people that are interested.
Sure. So the shameless plug, www.movemeback.com. I think you can get started from there. It's a members-only community, so you can apply to become a member, and then we'll take it from there. But there are a lot of things coming specifically on the student community point of view, both in the US and the UK, and we have a number of initiatives both on the professional working side but also the entrepreneurial side. So would love for any feedback, any thoughts, and certainly happy to speak with anyone at any stage in terms of their career and options.
Thank you. And it is a free subscription. Sorry, Peter, you were saying?
Yeah, very briefly, I just wanted to also give a shout out to Aliyu Fafana, and the Go Getters team, who also act as a bridge between Westerners and the business opportunities within the sub-Saharan Africa as well. Just wanted to give that as well.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so moving on now, the next topic is racism in the UK. And I feel like this has been amplified by the recent migrant crisis, which should be called the refugee crisis. You know, we've seen this rhetoric in the news and the media about these migrants wanting to come in, and it's been very much negative. And so racism in the UK has been something that has been talked about a lot recently. And Sienna, I know you experienced racism, overt racism, recently. And so could you just start off by telling us what happened to you?
Yeah, sure. So on Friday the 16th of October 2015, I was on my way to Liverpool John Moore University. I'm on tour right now, and actually I've almost finished, but this was a stop on my tour, and I was on a train from Birmingham, New Street, going to Liverpool, Lime Street, and most of the journey was pretty uneventful until the last 45 minutes, where, you know, in short, I mean, a lot of this is online, but in short, a very big racist white man decided to pick on me. He sat next to me and started hurling abuse, and over 45 minutes, and essentially, it culminated with him literally physically assaulting me and hitting me and throwing a bottle in my face. So on a packed train where pretty much no one did anything for 45 minutes.
What was the most surprising thing about the incident?
Well, you know, I think there's definitely, I have a lot to digest, to be honest, if I'm honest. I think it's still something I am digesting now. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I was surprised as such. I write about this stuff a lot, but I mean, I guess no matter what, you always are surprised that it happens to you. I think it's not so much the horrible, violent, racist man which was the biggest surprise. I think it was more the impotence and the silence and the apathy of everyone on board my train. I think that was the most terrifying thing, because it just showed me that there really is no safety in numbers, and really and truly that man could have actually killed me on that train and no one would have done anything. So I think that really hit home that, you know, that really, you're kind of out here on your own, to be honest.
And so what would you say was the biggest thing that you learned? So, for example, if this sort of thing happened to me, what would you say people should have done? This isn't me victim blaming, but for example, if this was me and I'm witnessing you being held abuse at, racist abuse, what do you do? What do you expect people to do?
I think the big question is, what do you do? But I mean, part of it is common sense, to be quite honest. I think I really do think if I was a white woman or even just a man of any race, it would have panned out a lot differently. I think specifically the way I was treated was to do with the intersection of my race and my gender. But I think really and truly it shouldn't have taken 45 minutes for someone to finally step in after I'd already been hit. I think people, you know what, I think what happened on my train was that a lot of it, I was victim blamed, I was shamed for reacting, and I was told to stop making a scene. What really should have happened is that people should have been focused on the racist and should have told him to be quiet and told him that they didn't want to hear what he was saying. I think it's quite easy enough. I think more people should have just got involved and shot him down in terms of telling him to be quiet, because he was very violent with his words before he actually became physically violent. Yeah, I think definitely it's a case of like telling people that no, it's not okay, and more than one person doing it. Definitely, I just thought it's common sense and what you would do. Like, I would never have sat there and just let it escalate to that point, and I certainly wouldn't have sat there for 5 minutes hearing someone call you the most disgusting, violent things that someone could call you. You know.
How has it affected you?
Well, obviously when it happened, I went to the police station and had kind of 3 hours of just talking to the police and giving a statement. I think at the time, you know, the officer asked me if I'm okay and if this will affect me, and I think, you know, I think I was sort of, I told myself I'm not going to be like the strong black woman because I'm a human being first and foremost. But I think I ended up kind of going down that route a bit of saying I'm okay, like, you know, I'm still going to do what I've got to do. But no, this has definitely hugely affected my life, actually, and I think I think as I get closer to having some downtime to reflecting, I think it's more something, you know, there's a bit of anxiety in getting on trains, to be honest. I think there's anxiety in where I choose to sit. Like, it's just small things, but I think this has hugely affected me, to be honest. And I think I wasn't, I mean, you know, I wanted people to know about it, and I think I was 80% prepared for all the attention. But, you know, particularly this last week in the kind of final stretch of my tour, the 20% took over, and it's been difficult. Like, I can't lie, it's been quite difficult for me, yeah.
Sienna, to chip in here very briefly, what would you say to play devil's advocate a bit? What would you say to, because I know there are many people of different backgrounds and different opinions who listen in and they view opinions of shows such as this and people such as ourselves. What would you say to people who speak about the concept of, for example, the angry black woman? Like, maybe, for example, you could have avoided the situation if you would have been a bit more quote unquote civil, if you didn't have to react, even though no one was there, no one on Twitter was there when you went through this. But what do you say to those people that talk about this concept of the angry black woman, and why do you need to shout? Why do you need to make such a fuss about it? Why do you need to call people to get involved? Like you mentioned, people were telling you on the mode of transport, yeah, they were saying calm down. And again, that feeds into this concept that I'm saying. What's your opinion of this whole thing of the angry black woman? Where do people get it from, and how does it affect you in these situations?
Well, that's a big question, and I think, to be honest, I'd first start off by saying about 99% of all the reaction and support has been positive, but of course there's that 1% where you get, to be honest, other racist creatures saying certain things, and, you know, a couple of people kind of like victim blaming as they were on there and kind of saying being calm. But I think we need to understand, and I'm almost going to reject that entire concept straight away and just say that there's not a way to avoid these things. The only way to avoid it if I'm not black and woman, simple as that. This was a racist incident, and I was targeted specifically because of who I am. So short of changing who I am, there's no way to avoid it. What we need to be focusing on is very much kind of why these things happen in society, yeah? So in terms of the angry black woman stereotype, that played out in terms of people telling me to calm down. They expected me to be quiet and to suffer in silence. And the only reason why my abuser is now going to be dealt with by the police, hopefully, is because I made sure that people knew what I was going through. And on the train, I basically told everyone that they're cowards, and I told them that what's interesting is that if I was someone else, they probably wouldn't have sat there in silence. And I think you know, if you don't do something, then nothing gets done. I made sure that there was enough attention finally for the train to stop and someone to be arrested, because why should I go through that and have my abuser get away with it? So I think I would just say anyone who wants to focus on maybe you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that, they're firstly victim blaming, which is something very rife in this country. Women are always blamed for their abuse. They're blamed for being raped. They are blamed for being bashed. They're blamed for everything. So I say ask yourself about your personal politics and why that's your focus. The angry black woman stereotype is a controlling image from the days of colonialism, if not before, and it's in the same realm as the Jezebel and the Mammy, and they're all controlling images to make sure that we black women are scared to speak up because people say you fit into this stereotype and you fit into that stereotype. So I just reject all of them.
Yeah. But in some ways, we can't do anything about that as a black woman.
No, and it's not my duty.
Exactly, it's not our duty to. We're almost reliant on the fact that they're gonna come to their senses. So what positive take can we have on this?
I think I've done quite a good job in terms of getting the word out and stuff, and I think for me it was key to do so, because for every story, the rare story you hear, so for every one of my stories, there are 1,000 that do not get reported. When I finally reported mine and spoke about it, I had a lot of women of colour from all sorts of backgrounds tell me, and people of colour, men as well, tell me about what happened to them. You know, one story I really keep in mind is someone messaged me saying that she was on a train. I think she was a Muslim woman or an Asian woman, and you know, this racist kicked her in her stomach when she was 7 months pregnant on a train, and no one did anything. So these things are horrific, and they do happen, and most people just don't talk about it. In our community, back to everything we've said, we get taught to get on with it. We get taught to be quiet, to not make a fuss, to get on with it and pray to God to make things better. All these kind of nonsense things, really, because we're taught that we're born to suffer, which I reject. That I'm not born to suffer. So there we go.
I'm just going to read out some of the tweets. We have Dara Curtin saying, Sienna telling her story of experiencing overt racism on the train. What shocks me the most was definitely the apathy. We have Raifa saying tolerance has been a buzzword and a fashion statement in British thought for a while. But what people don't recognise is that being tolerant does not mean that prejudice is eradicated. racism will never ever leave British mentality until the educational institutions properly teach Black history.
Did she fit that into her
that as well, actually?
Yeah.
Because
wow.
I think what's really key is that, again, I wanted people to just remember we're not in a post-racial society, and a lot of the evil things the man was saying to me, I actually was attacked by a driver on the Wednesday, and this was all Hate Crime Awareness Week. So those two white men who abused me said things like, you know, I'm a benefit scrounger, you know, a kind of, they talked about, the kind of, the welfare queen stereotype we just put out there, a lot of Black women. There were also, he talked a lot about me being a dirty African with Ebola. Where did he get that from? Of course, TV. He said that his grandfather fought in the war to keep dirty Africans like me out. Well, again, the institutions in this country, racism is institutionalized in Britain, and the institutions, including the education institutions, don't teach you about your history. They don't teach you that my grandfather and other Caribbean Black men fought in the war, and they don't teach you that at one point during World War II, India was providing 1/3 of the food for this country. They don't teach you those things. And so the white people here think that they literally created everything and that the rest of us are inferior.
But the incident that you're talking about, the cab driver, obviously that's going to be sort of a working class male.
Possibly.
Possibly. We often think of racism and associate it with the perpetrators being working class and male. However, a lot of racism is also by the middle class, the upper middle class, etc. So, and it's a lot, exactly, it's a lot more insidious, and maybe actually we can't even say more important, because we're talking about our doctors being racist, our educators being racist, etc. So as you said before, that institutionalized racism, again, there's not, I don't see what we could do about it apart from advocate, as somebody has already said, for Black history and global history to be taught in British schools.
I think part of it also is maybe back to some of the stuff we were talking about in the women in leadership stuff, that, you know, we do need more Black doctors, and we do need more Black mental health professionals. We do need more Black police people and all that. We need all these things, but we have to remember that, again, it's about meaningful representation. If you're put into a rotten racist system, even if you mean well, you're still going to end up operating in a rotten racist system. And so it's very much an institutional problem. And a lot of the time we just put band-aids over the wound itself. And I think that it's very, very deep. Like, it's very, very deep. This country is the birth mother of colonialism. So, you know, we've got to remember that when we're talking about it. And unlike America, racism here is very nuanced, and it's the kind of place where you might not get a job because your name is too African, or you're told that your hair is not suitable as a Black woman for the workplace, and you're unlikely to be shot down in cold blood like Mark Duggan here, but you'll be one of the 1,500 people killed in police custody behind closed doors in the last 24 years, with not one officer being arrested for your death.
Okay, so
can I just jump in? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just back off of what Sienna said there. One thing that has really surprised me over the last, say, 6 months is that actually the statistics do exist that show that without a shadow of a doubt, this country is institutionally racist from top to bottom. Because like you said earlier, you said we think of racism as something that uneducated uneducated working class people perpetuate, these attitudes of some kind of backwards person over there. They're the kind of crazy racist. We don't actually, as a culture and as a country, exhibit these attitudes. When in reality, when you look into it, whether it's police statistics, whether it's employment statistics, where it's been proven time and time after time that employer bias is the #1 barrier to people of color getting employment in this country. Not qualifications, not anything like that. It's simply employer bias, and it's been proven for almost a decade now. Things like mental health, where I obviously talk about and have a good understanding of, it's been proven time after time after time that mental health professionals failing to understand and failing to comprehend the issues that people of color face has led to people of color getting caught into the criminal justice system rather than getting the care that they need, or people believing that people from different backgrounds, from POC backgrounds, just don't have these issues. It must be something else. It must be criminality or some strange conclusion that's jumped to. And it does exist. And I think one thing that does need to happen is actually, it's easy to say we need to talk about it, but really and truly we do, because people don't actually know just how deeply racist this country is, institutionally racist this country is, because people don't see it. People don't see it visually day after day, time after time. People don't read about these things. And to be honest, I didn't think these numbers existed, but they clearly do, and they're quite, well, they're relatively easy to find and easier to find now. A lot of the work that Media Diversified have been doing has made it easy for me to find some of these statistics. And we do need to put these numbers out there to say, look, a lot of people don't believe that this country is racist, or I have conversations with people saying it's not as racist as America, and nonsense statements like that. Exactly, because we don't really have that visual. I think racism here, we should stop thinking about it as, okay, it is nuanced, but I think a new language we should bring is, it's not visual. It exists, but we don't put it on a platform. So it's not just about being nuanced, because some of the non-nuanced stuff, what happened to Sienna, to be honest, is not nuanced at all. What happened to Mark Duggan is not nuanced. So we need to actually put this out on a more visual, more vocal platform, constantly bang on about it, so that people see that it does exist. The statistics are there to prove it. They've been there to prove it for a long time.
I feel some of the stuff you were talking about, sorry, just very briefly, Chama, a lot of the stuff you're talking about is so important, and it refers to a lot of things in the past and history where discrimination and acts done against certain races were quite overt. So, for example, people were hindered the right to vote, whereas nowadays it seems on surface level or superficially that everyone has the same rights. Therefore, it's harder for people to recognize what is the discrimination.
You're correct. There are some things. You're correct. There are some things that are like sort of underground, like the job thing. To be honest,
so a lot of the discrimination now. A lot of the discrimination nowadays is subconscious, and it's through a lot of psychological things, like, for example, the media, as we all know about. So I feel it is something that we do need to. Because Sienna, what you said that really struck me was, for every one incident like yourself in regards to what happened to you, there are so many others and people who got in touch with you. And you mentioned quite a few times the fact that we must make noise till it's noticed, because if you didn't make noise, or if you did not speak about
another untold story, simple as that,
exactly,
you must recognize
it wouldn't have been dealt with.
And I recognise that, well, he's not been dealt with yet. That's the thing, which is why I'm still making noise, because this is still something that can be swept under the carpet. Often is. People pay lip service on the day. And so I work in the media, and I understand the power of social media, which is why I used it. But I know that I have privileges, and that there are so many people who weren't like me, who were able to tweet about it, who were able to talk to the press about it, and make sure there's attention on it. So as I said, for every one of my story, there are many, many more. And
would you say that's the biggest piece of advice for someone who may face such a situation as you did?
Talk about it. I'm not saying it's tweet, but you have to, I think, talk about it. It's not easy, and it actually gets very exhausting to talk about it, if I'm honest, because you're replaying something that's pretty horrifying. And like I said, it wasn't just his actions, it was the inaction of other people, which is definitely part of my kind of trauma, shall we say, because again, I don't now believe that there is safety in numbers, and I don't necessarily feel that safe in transit and using public transport, if I'm honest. But I think it's important to encourage people who have been abused, victims, to talk about it, and for nobody to belittle them and say that their experience is, oh, it's not as bad as this experience, or it's not as bad as this. Like, there's definitely, again, in our community, we need to encourage people to speak out. I think our parents were conditioned often to just deal with it and to not talk about it, and to put their heads down and assimilate and get on with it. And I think our generation is rejecting that in many ways, but there are still many of us who are like, don't be extra, like, leave it, it's really bad, but you know, you just have to like turn this around. And it's again still all of the responsibility being put on you, the victim. So I think to talk about it, and then you enable others to discuss it. And the discussion is very important. But then I'm doing some things, like I'm gonna be working on a manual actually via No Fly on the Wall, for kind of just collecting all the stories that I've heard and stories I will collect, and kind of maybe certain things like knowing where the safety button is on trains, knowing where the safety button is on buses, and like numbers for emergency services. There are some things that I was advised after the incident I didn't know about. So just things like that, really. I
That's really important.
Self-defense classes. It's not something I should really have to do, but hey, you know, these things do affect you. So I think, knowledge is key, definitely.
Fantastic, and that's a really great action point. Talk about it. If something happens to you, talk about it. Obviously, you don't have a responsibility to do so, but it could help you and it could help others. Okay, so thank you so much, guys, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Hopefully we were able to shed some knowledge. We were able to learn from each other. Peter, is there anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, firstly, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who's listening live. I know there are going to be people who listen in after this is recorded. I want to give a big shout out to not only just our speakers, our awesome speakers, but our VC podcast team. You guys have been amazing. You guys have been awesome. Without you guys, this thing would not be possible. And lastly, just to hand it back to the speakers to let the audience know how we can keep in touch with you and with the great things you're doing within our many communities. Starting with Chama.
Okay, yeah. So best place to catch me is on Twitter at Chama_KCHAMA_KAY. I'm forever talking about mental health and Black issues in mental health. So yeah, if you want to keep in touch with that, follow me on Twitter. I'm always talking about it. So yeah.
Cool. Diana?
Oh, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook on AFW Amsterdam. Yeah, hashtag AFW Amsterdam. That's more the professional links to keep in touch with what we do, and we're always inspiring and empowering young Black feminists in the society.
Fantastic.
And in the corporate world as well.
Miriam? Yeah,
guys, I'd urge you, if you're a Black woman, to just follow WCAN ETWRK, so WCAN Network, both on Facebook and Twitter. Not just if you're interested in the corporate world, because I think it's just a good community for Black female students and everyone to get involved. So definitely follow on there.
Awesome. Sienna?
You can follow me on Twitter at Sienna, spelled SIANAARRH. That's at Sienna. I'm often talking about a variety of things, particularly Black womanhood. And do follow No Fly on the Wall. We've got an event coming up on Thursday the 5th of November, which is a screening of the trailer to the film Troy James Idu and I have been making about police brutality in the UK, and it's called 1,500 and Counting. And we're chronicling the story of Sheku Bayo's death and other deaths in police custody, so a bit of what I've been talking about today. So do go on our social media and RSVP via Eventbrite, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday.
Awesome. And Charles?
Yes, and again, a big thank you to the VC team and all the other listeners tuning in. To catch me, as you've heard before, www.movemeback.com. You can also get me on email, charles@movemeback.com. Please do feel free to reach out, especially for those who are in the student graduate space. We really want to hear your thoughts on how we can be more helpful in terms of thinking about Africa. And also, we're trying to do a lot more in terms of sharing perspectives, sharing people's thoughts on the continent. So we're looking for budding writers and people who want to share their own perspectives on Africa. So please do get in touch. Thank you.
Awesome. And Mel, do you have any last tweets that were mentioned about the last topic that we can?
Yeah, everyone was really engaged, so that was great. Hopefully we can have more of that next time. A tweet that I really liked was to do with from Nana Achiampong, and she said, "Are we sure?" This was to do with Move Me Back, and she said, "Are we sure they need our Western skills? Are we not indirectly attempting to civilize them, just as the West has done before?" There were also some about from They Call Her Toby saying, "Stand in. Being a bystander is the biggest threat to our generation. It's easier said than done, but we need to start being active." And about change only coming from people and our experiences. So just making sure that we actually use a lot of the things we've discussed today to actually take action in future.
That's deep. And Toby?
Thank you guys for having me. You can find me on Twitter on Toby Rachel, so that's TOBIRACHEL _, and also a lot of my writing on dreamnation.co.uk. We actually have a gala, a networking event. We spoke a bit about networking today. So we have a gala networking event on December the 18th, and you can find out more about that and how to get your tickets at dreamnation.co.uk /gala.
Awesome. Just a big, huge shout out to Naomi Simon, also our host and the main face of our podcast over the past year as well. Naomi, don't worry, it's not going to be her last podcast. She's handing over the baton. She's training up some of our other members in the team to be hosts as well. So Naomi will be back. But I just wanted to say a big thank you to you also for all your help and contribution. Over to you.
Thank you for the privilege of being the host for the final time. So please do remember though to subscribe on iTunes for weekly podcasts. It's been great having built this up for the past year, and hopefully we were able to make an impact within the young Black British community. So I hope to see you all over at 20 something, and also that you all have a blessed week. And yeah, we'll be keeping in touch. Thanks, Peter.